Esta ha sido la presentación del quinteto homenaje a Astor Piazzolla con los maestros Nicolás Gershperentiano, Gustavo Musso y Damián y Mariano Sibori en contrabajo. Les recordamos mantener sus ubicaciones y por favor colocar los celulares en silencio. Muchas gracias. En minutos nada más vamos a dar inicio a esta ceremonia de apertura. Si son tan amables, tomen ubicación, tomen asiento en cada ubicación. Es un gusto contar con la presencia de cada uno y cada una de ustedes. Y nuevamente les recordamos la delicadeza de poner los celulares en silencio. Muchas gracias. Le pegan al micrófono y no. Gracias. No, perdón. La vicepresidenta de la República Argentina.
Welcome Vice President Kirchner, Dr. Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, as well as the co-presidents of Eurolat, Oscar Dario Pérez Pineda and Javi López.
Señoras y señores, muy buenos días.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to this opening ceremony of the 14th Ordinary Session of the Eurolat Parliamentary Assembly. In this National Blue Whale Center and Kirchner Cultural Center in Buenos Aires in the Argentine Republic, we want to see a fair and inclusive economic recovery. This ceremony will be chaired by the Vice President of the Republic and Leader of the Senate, Dr. Cristina Fernández de Kirchner.
La acompañan en el estrado.
She is accompanied by Javi López, a member of the European Parliament, who is co-chair of the European side of the Eurolat Assembly, and Oscar Dario Pérez Pineda, who has come from the Chamber of Representatives of Colombia, who is the co-chair on the Latin American side of the Eurolat Assembly. We have over 100 legislators from Latin America and Europe who are participating in this assembly. We in particular would like to welcome our senators and members of the Argentine Congress, as well as representatives from both chambers, national, provincial and municipal representatives, as well as accredited diplomatic representatives in the country. And you, ladies and gentlemen, our guests. I invite you to stand for the national anthem played by the Mr. Matías Sagreras of the Kirchner Center.
la Asamblea Parlamentaria Euro.
The Eurolet Parliamentary Assembly is the parliamentary branch of transatlantic cooperation. It was founded as part of the Latin America Caribbean Summit. There are 4 committees: sustainable development, environment, energy policy, research, innovation and technology, social affairs, young people and children, education, culture, and economic, financial and trade affairs. Also, food security and fighting hunger, as well as fighting organized crime and cross-border crime and terrorism, and 2 open fora, the Women's Forum and the Civil Society Forum. The opening words will be given to Oscar Darío Pérez Pineda, who is the co-chair from the Latin American side of the Eurolat Assembly.
Señora Vicepresidenta.
Madam Vice President, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, Co-President, on behalf of the European Parliament, Javi López, ladies and gentlemen of the media, ladies and gentlemen, Vice Presidents of the Latin American and European sides, ladies and gentlemen. Respected members of Parliament, I'd like to start by expressing my joy that I feel at being able to once again come back and meet in the Euro-Latin American Summit with physical presence. Although IT and communication technologies have been extremely important in maintaining contact and working on our shared projects, nothing can be the same as the warmth and fraternity that you experience when we can meet once again all in the same place. The last 2 years have been marked by significant challenges and difficulties on the international scene, particularly for the various fora, such as this assembly, which are focusing on democracy and which bring together representatives of citizens with different ideologies, beliefs, and different ways of seeing the world. Nonetheless, our Assembly will continue its constant work in order to overcome obstacles that arise and to ensure the work of the committees and the Bureau, and we worked on that in 2021. That would not have been possible without the significant efforts made by Co-President Javi López, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank him for his commitment that is shown in strengthening the bi-regional relations. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank ex-Senator of the Santa Fe region, Omar Perotti, who was the first person to suggest that this meeting should take place in the beautiful land of Argentina. Furthermore, I would like to thank Senator Adolfo Rodriguez Sá, Senator Silvia Jacopo, and all of the Senate of the Republic of Argentina for taking this initiative and for welcoming us into your home. And doing everything possible to ensure the success of all of the activities that are taking place under this 14th ordinary session of the Eurolat Assembly. As we heard yesterday, our hospitality comes naturally to the people of Argentina. So anyone who comes here will never feel like they are foreign. In recent years, one of the key things that has impacted all aspects of our life has, of course, been the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, according to WHO figures, over 2 million people in Europe and 60 million people in Latin America have been affected, and there have also been uncountable deaths in our regions. Nonetheless, what we have seen is human ability and cooperation in order to meet the challenges, the technological, social, political challenges that we've seen, as well as the healthcare challenges that were thrown up by the pandemic. In Europe, about 580 million people are vaccinated, and in Latin America and the Caribbean it's 430 million, according to the WHO. This progress, these figures, do not represent the end of the pandemic or the end of the challenges and the work that we're going to have to do. This is just the start. They're just the first step that we've been able to take, and which show that when you have commitment and solidarity, then human beings can overcome any problems that they face. That's why this 14th plenary session of Eurolat and the message that we want to send out to the Union of Heads and States and Government of the Bi-Regional Association that we want to send out as co-presidents is that we want to see a fair and inclusive economic recovery. Although making progress with vaccines is important, what we don't want is that the post-pandemic world should be the same as the one that we lived in before 2020. This historic moment cannot end in yet another return to the historic inequality that we've seen, unequal access to public services, discrimination and poverty for large sectors of our populations. No. The outcome of this meeting has to be a roadmap with policies and targeted recommendations in all of the major topics that the committees have been working on, in order to ensure that our two regions will be the driving force behind recovery. And we won't go back to a world that is unsustainable. One example of that is the high levels of public debt for many Latin American countries, perhaps all of them. These countries have difficulty in ensuring their economic and social recovery. Therefore, I would like to urge everyone present to work to ensure that international multilateral credit institutions and that the lender states should establish policies to substitute debt, or at least part of it, into investment and social development. That's the only way we will genuinely be able to construct countries and regions and a world which is fair and inclusive. Despite the challenges we face, we won't be looking merely at the post-pandemic debates. We also have to look at serious debates that should be had on the international organizations in recent years. The international system has to ensure self-determination and sovereignty for peoples. And they are clamoring for our support and our help. We need to fight totalitarianism, those who want to impose themselves through arms, death and invasion. And in light of this, I would like to urge all of you to raise up our voice to reject war, violence and discrimination. We have to, through our work and our committees and the plenary and the other bodies of this assembly, work to demonstrate that Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean as a whole are regions of peace which reject violence and which promote diplomatic, peaceful, negotiated ways to overcome differences. Taking account of all of these challenges, I would like to just say that I want to ensure that this Euro-Lat Assembly will mark a new phase in the relations between the two regions. We have to leave behind political and ideological differences and ensure pragmatic cooperation. Cooperation which will have at its heart the well-being of individuals and communities. Cooperation which will leave behind the divisions between the major poles of the international systems and which will find a third way to provide a new model of sustainable development, social equity and democracy. That's why we need to reactivate summits between Latin American and Caribbean summits, CELAC, and the European Union. To strengthen our cooperation, we also need to turn 180 degrees in the way in which the Euro-Lat Assembly works. Since 2006, we have focused on the legislators from the two regions, but now we have to focus on everything that we do. The decisions that we make are resolutions that are adopted by citizens. Therefore, I believe we need to establish a new strategy which will be based on the need to focus on the resolutions that come out of our parliaments and the work being done at Latin American level and in international bodies. That's how we can ensure that our debates and the knowledge that we build in these sessions will not merely remain ink on paper, but will become a tool in the service of our people. If we can do that, this assembly will become a reference point at international level and which will have a positive impact on its regions. Ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, the work that lies ahead will be difficult, but I'm sure that I can count on all of your commitment to ensure that this assembly will become a reference point for recommendations, good practices, exchange of views and public policies in favour of the well-being of all people in our region. Madam Vice President, you are up to this challenge.
Usted le da altura a nuestras deliberaciones. Usted no.
You have our commitment And please be assured that this Argentine people who we love so much and who love you so much will be victorious.
Va a guiarnos para que el producto.
We will work to ensure that the outcome of our meetings is entirely successful. The success of the Eurolat Assembly means the success of the people that we represent. Thank you.
La palabra de
Oscar Dario Perez Pineda, who is the co-president on behalf of the Latin American component for the Eurolat Assembly. Now, I should like to call Javi Lopez to the rostrum. He is the co-president from the European Parliament, the European component of Eurolat.
Bueno, muchísimas.
Thank you very much. Well, I feel somewhat like I'm out of my depth here, like someone from the Beatles. Feels like the first concert of the Beatles, something like that. But I'll try to be as quick as I possibly can in my remarks this morning. Thank you so much for being here this morning. And thank you, first and foremost, to the Vice President, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, for having been here, for being here with us this morning. She is here as the authority, as the President of the Senate, and has been so active in the participation of this, the 14th Eurolat Assembly. It's a significant one at that. There are 100 members of parliament here. It's been 10 years since 100 of them. So we know that there are some 1.2 billion individuals are represented here via the more than 100 members of parliament that are present. So thank you so much to the Secretariat from the Argentine Parliament. Thank you to the Secretariat of the European Parliament. Thank you so much to everyone who assisted us and who did all that made it possible for us to be here today to have these debates. And we're doing this at a time that's quite particular, really. We're in Argentina, which is currently holds the pro tempore presidency of CELAC, and its driving role means that it's extremely crucial for us to be here in Argentina today. Now, we're also meeting after 2 years of pandemic. This was an experience that was so complicated for everyone, for governments, authorities, citizens, a tragedy that has overhauled the lives of every single individual. And now we know that the pandemic made us all equal. It made us all isolated, but at the same time, it connected us all too. What an enormous experience this was. Everyone saw their life completely overhauled, and so it was the first time, the World Cup, of course. Let's not get into that, but aside from that, we know that it had been 100 years since the planet experienced a pandemic, and the last thing that had impacted us like that was the World War. So we also know that it reminded us that humanity has a common destiny, and that we can't do it alone, that we have no choice but be together, that we have a shared destiny, and it needs to be a shared destiny. So over the course of these 2 days, we're going to continue to speak about the pandemic, how we can continue to fight it. We know that in some places of the world, vaccination has not yet come, and we need to make that access to the vaccination universal access.
Porque sabemos también y nos
Because we know, and the pandemic reminded us, that science is the best ally that institutions and citizens have, and that those over the course of recent years, they tried to deny that and to pretend that science didn't mean anything, and then actually what we saw is that we all had to go back to that belief, and that firm belief in science. We had no choice. Science, vaccination, making it equal for all, universal access for a vaccine. Let's talk about that. A pandemic that continues to hit many places hard. We're also talking about recovery, the economic recovery that is not an easy task. Essentially, the world went into hibernation. The economies went into hibernation so that we could protect our health. And that had an enormous social impact on every single corner of the world. And it wasn't easy, of course, to take decisions in that context. It wasn't easy and isn't easy for us to manage and govern this. And now what we know is that the economic recovery absolutely has to factor in the fact that there's no way we can go back to the world that it was before, in the pre-pandemic world. We cannot go back to that. We need to have this recovery that is going to change things and that rises to new challenges, the climate change as well as our green action. We also are going to need an economic recovery that factors in inequality. We know that over the course of the last 2 days, the pandemic made inequalities worse in our countries and in the world. And so this is a question not just of justice, but it's also a question of what our economies need, because if we don't address this, our economies are worse off and they're more inequal, and that's actually going to sap our institutions. We've seen that everywhere, wherever that may be. So recovery, that means that we're going to need also a tax aspect and access to credit, wherever that may be. We need a fair recovery and an inclusive recovery. And of course, we also have to discuss about what has taken place over the course, over the last few weeks on European land, the invasion of a country, Ukraine. This is something that Europeans are very concerned about. It's not because it's about Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, but because of this tragedy that they are experiencing firsthand. But it's also about what our vision for the world is. How do we want to organize our world in the future? Do we want to have rules that everyone has to abide by, the same rules for everyone? Or do we want a world that is managed via force and might? This is the debate that we have, and we have to state it clearly, because the world is going to have to react. The world is indeed reacting. Moreover, it's important to talk about the consequences of the war, because the war is not just a tragedy in Ukraine. It is, but it's also having an impact on energy prices, and it is triggering inflation all around the world, in Europe, in our countries, but around the world. And also because war is something that is going to undermine food security and for a huge proportion of the world's population, and international organizations will have to be able to coordinate, work hand in hand to make sure that we do not that this does not result in hunger in anywhere in the world, because this is the real risk. This is the real risk. Now, the war also reminded us a few things in terms of relations with the world, and specifically, I'd like to focus here on our relations with Latin America. We know that if we look, for example, if we look around us in your neighborhood, we had very important elections in the United States. And I'd like to thank the entire region for having shown this strength in terms of making sure that rules were respected, specifically Argentina in this case, which was so important for us. So I think that this shows us, it tells us that we have a real shared vision for the world, a shared vision for the world. You know, perhaps we know that geographically we aren't close to each other, but yet we share so much. We are open societies. We want to build a demanding democracy, a rules-based democracy, but we know that we have to have social cohesion and opportunities for all, because otherwise none of this will work. That we need to have open societies for globalization, a rules-based form of globalization with a human face. This is what we defend, and both regions that are represented here in the world, we defend this. And so the world is changing. It's changing greatly, and therefore it would be a good opportunity for both regions to work together. So having that EU-CELAC summit, of course, that has been suspended now for a number of years, but the parliamentary branch of that maintained its role, and that is crucial. So with our relations, and I'd like to conclude on this point, our relations between Latin America and Europe, well, that depends, or the lack, the risk of that is a bipolar world, a world of tension. We would like to see a multipolar world, an inclusive world, a colorful world, not just a black and white world, a world that is a rules-based world with institutions and multilateral institutions that work for all, as well as financial institutions that need to be reformed, as well as political institutions. And this is the world that we want to see, and that is why relations between the EU and Latin America are so incredibly important to us. Now, to conclude, of course, here we are in Argentina, and we are in Buenos Aires, and this was a part of our deliberations. I'd just like to remind all that this is the 40th anniversary of the Malvinas. We also discussed that point, too.
Recordarlo.
It was important to recall this.
Que se requiere una...
That with a solution, an international law, and within the United Nations, because it is worthwhile to recall that at this time. Important to recall it at the time. Thank you very much.
Es copresidente del componente europeo.
Javi Lopez, who's the co-president of the European Parliament, the European component of Eurolat. In order to open formally and inaugurate formally the 14th plenary session of Eurolat, we'd like to give the floor to the Vice President of the Argentine Republic, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, President of the Senate of the Argentine Republic.
Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Co-presidents, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Parliament. The truth is that today is a very emotional day. The last time that I was in this beautiful cultural centre was to inaugurate it. This was a very dear project. It began under President Kirchner. In 2006, just when Eurolat began to work, we renovated the beautiful historic building of the post office of Argentina, and it was a monument from the Belle Epoque in Argentina. The project finished in 2015 when we inaugurated it. I've never actually spoken here. This is the first time that I'm speaking from here. It's finally my turn to speak in this beautiful blue whale, which is an unprecedented architectural marvel. This was made in Germany. I think the organ is from 1902, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I've been president twice and vice president, and for 20 years I was a legislator, a member of parliament. So I can very much identify with all of your debates and the parliamentary work that you do. The topic that you are focusing on this fourth session, the motto, which is an economic recovery with justice, inclusive and in peace. It's an excellent slogan, motto. And of course, this requires economic recovery after the tragedy that our two co-presidents have referred to, the pandemic. The pandemic has affected lives, governments, and the whole planet. I think it brings us to a debate. I think it's already started in the European Parliament in 2017 in Brussels, I remember, where inequality, of course this was before the pandemic, inequality was discussed, and it was clear that we were already living in an increasingly unequal world, and tragically the pandemic has increased this inequality. However, I firmly believe that even the worst tragedies can teach us something. In the European Parliament, we took a historic view of the history of the welfare state, the concept of neoliberalism as well. Both of these constructs, the welfare state and neoliberalism, are political constructions, political projects. Yes, they're economic, but as one member of the members of the European Parliament has said, I think it's very clear that capitalism has shown itself to be an effective system to produce goods and services. The production of goods and services needs people, from producing food up to the most complex technological goods. Yes, this is the most effective system, but that's not everything. I think that the pandemic has revitalized the debate around neoliberalism and the view that we've had of it over a number of years. It was after the war that the idea of the welfare state came out. On the one hand, you had the Soviet Union, and on the other hand, the Western free Christian world, so to speak. The welfare state was created largely as a tool, as a system whereby the state had significant responsibility for people: education, health, access to dignified work, proper housing. The state was responsible for that. Of course, each individual, each person also had to work. And after the fall of Berlin, we saw the rise of neoliberalism. Now, we saw before that communism, and there was a common feeling in society that we are responsible for our lives. You're completely free. If you If you have work, then it's up to you. And if you don't have a job, it's because you don't deserve it or you're not doing enough. And if you don't have housing, it's because you haven't worked hard enough. This was the general sentiment created by neoliberalism, and which still exists in a number of societies. And Jordi, yes, it was the pandemic that brought about, once again, the idea of state. People started to ask, about its role in the lives of all of us. If states hadn't intervened, if states hadn't built new hospitals, hadn't cared for the sick, hadn't negotiated with the markets or laboratories about vaccines to ensure that we could all be protected, then what would we have done? If people continue to state that the state isn't important in people's lives, the state plays no role in people's lives, I would say state policies are absolutely key. I think that the major debate is going to have to be as follows. Inequality isn't because of some inevitable natural order of things. Inequalities aren't the result of nature. They are the result of political decisions or a lack of political decisions. If you don't take the necessary political decisions, then we see inequality. So I think that the major debate that we're going to have is around whether this process, this system capitalism that we see around the world, from China to the United States, is being run by the laws of the market or the laws of a state. This is really the key. I think that's what we need to look at if we want to seriously look at the issue of inequality and to tackle it. You know, we can't just have debates and occasional meetings and at the same time problems are worsening and inequality is increasing. We also have to look at what type of state we want. What kind of institutional architecture or engineering do we need as a state in order to face this world, which is now entirely different from the world we lived in before? And this was already being looked at in 2017 in the European Parliament. Now, states are built on this famous tripartite division, legislative, executive, judicial, and so forth. That was after the French Revolution. And that's where our current institutional organization dates back to. The state, represented by the three powers, was the power. The Ancien regime, which fell under the French regime, organized around the clerics, the nobility, and the monarchy, ended. It was the people then who came to the popular assembly, and they made up all power at that moment. Today, our parliaments, our executives, our judicial authorities These are often sometimes in hoc to economic powers. How much do they represent power really? We talk about power when someone can make or adopt a decision, and this decision is then implemented and respected by all of society and its members. You know, you can wear a sash and hold a hammer. Some people might think that's power, but believe me, it's not. And I'm saying this through experience. I won't tell you everything that I've seen. Let's just leave it at that. We have to keep in mind that when we adopted this institutional governance method, we didn't even have electricity. Cars didn't exist. Nothing like that. And if you look at technology, it's creating power outside of institutions. You know, we know how the executive should function and the legislature should function, and also judicial power. However, there's another type of power that's outside of all of this: the markets, monopolies, oligopolies, international financial power. None of this is covered by our constitutions. And when every 4 years or 2 years societies elect their representatives, none of these powers are at stake. And but those who are in the banks and so forth, there's very little that you can do about that. And we're seeing this translating into a lot of elections. And we're seeing that people are dissatisfied with democracy.
Co-presidente también. Pero
Having said that, democracy is unsatisfied. When people take a stand against politics, then we have to, I think, ask ourselves, perhaps we need to rethink our institutional makeup, where the power of the institutions is brought to be created, but it's not too late for us to rethink this. And that's why I believe that the pandemic came to solidify this discussion. Why? Because it's not possible to have a tragedy on the scale that we have just experienced and then have the state, the government, only to exist for that. And then when we need to make decisions on economy and regulation and checks and controls, well, then we can't. Then the government cannot do that. And the economic activity prevents that from happening. Think about that. Think about that. Now, in the world, in our country, throughout the pandemic, pardon me,
el sector privado,
the private sector received all kinds of aid in terms of legal aid, economic aid, support. But when we look at this other tragedy that we're experiencing, this war that I'm going to speak about shortly, I will get to that. What we know, we have the market saying, no, don't worry, no, this is my profitability, when this is my economic gain. No, but that's not enough. That's not enough. We can't, no, I'm not going to play. I'm not going to play anymore if that's the rule.
si cuando vos
If you needed us and we forgave your debt. We gave you assistance. You needed us then, but now you're not there for the people, for the society, for the government to back us up when we need you. It seems to me,
Creo
I think this is something that is being discussed here, but not only, everywhere, when it comes to international law. Jordi reminded us the 2nd of April marked the 40th anniversary, and we remember our veterans and those who fought for us in the Malvinas. And yes, the conflict came to, it was the 40th anniversary of the conflict on the 2nd of April.
y vos decías
And you were saying, well, the world needs all of us to follow international law and UN resolutions. It's a great idea. Great idea.
gran idea.
Great idea. But it's not happening. Why? Because of the 5 countries that have a veto on the Security Council and a permanent seat, all of them, US, the UK, France, Russia, all, at some point they didn't respect the international law at one point or another. Every single one.
Es más,
With the exception of China. And we've spoken out about this double standard in international law of these powers who believe that they are above all other countries and that they do not have to respect international law. And indeed, forced occupation of our Malvinas Islands saw the UK supported by other powers. When they don't want an invasion, they reject it, but when it's their allies who carried out the invasion, and then that's fine with them, then they support it.
entonces,
Therefore, Argentines dramatically have experienced this very double standard on our land. When one of our veterans one of the Malvinas veterans who works here in the Senate, and we gave him a certificate and an award, and said, well, how can they talk to us about the NATO when NATO put a base just 14,000 kilometers away? So, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, we have a NATO base 14,000 kilometers from the UK. So I think we need to show a bit of consistency here, because in 2014, Argentina was a part of the Security Council, had a seat on the Security Council on a temporary basis, like all other countries. And when it came to the annexation of Crimea, at the time it was a popular referendum, a consultation to see whether or not it would become a part of Russia or Ukraine. In my country, I was the individual that was there, and I voted on a resolution that condemned this crime, this issue of Crimea, because we supported territorial integrity through wherever it may be, anywhere in the world, throughout the entire globe. So, and to not continue my remarks far too long, I shall conclude. Yes, I think, Jordi, yes. Javi, I don't know why I'm saying Jordi. I know why Jordi's. It's because I've seen so many Spanish TV series on Netflix, and so that's why I was thinking Jordi. That's exactly where it came from. You know, Jordi. Javi, you told me Javi 3 times. Well, I have my administrative secretary from the Senate here that kept trying to assist me. Javi, sorry. My apologies. So, but yes, I think we do need to seriously rethink the world in which we want to live. In terms of inequality, just think for a second. You and everyone, the time we had the least inequality, it was from 45 to the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's when we had the least amount of inequality and the highest level of well-being. Here too. Piketty, I think, said that the first decade in the Latin American region was when people worked the most and where inequality dropped the most. And I have to say I feel completely honored because in 2012, a World Bank report said that Argentina in the last decade, so over the course of the last 10 years, Argentina doubled its middle class. So this is the best possible sign of social mobility that one can have. And I believe, to be frank, we need to really focus on that, on finding a way to come up with a new approach that means that we can have more equality, more justice, and address that issue of inequality. Moreover, we need rules of international law that are respected by all countries of the world, for every single country of the world, without any distinction. And again, I'd like, on this point, I'd like to ask for the assistance in the vultures, and in Latin America we had this resolution so that states cannot be extorted because of the vulture founds like Argentina was. This is extremely important in the UN also. To just echo what the co-president said, he spoke of multilateral institutions. You too said that, I believe, Mr. Co-President, if I'm not mistaken. Now, allow me to just remind everyone that today is a special day. It's an important day. It's the 13th of April. Because 6 years ago, 4 months after finishing my second term, on the 13th of April in 2016, the governor of a province of Buenos Aires, who's the minister of economy, as well as authorities from the central bank, we were told, no, that's enough. That's enough. No, God, no.
Que había sido
that there were, procedures that were used that are used by all central banks. It wasn't a political decision. Had it been, it could have been brought before justice, but and only if damages had been wreaked, but none had been wreaked at all. So we called the decision, or we called attention to the fact that for a political decision that was absolutely legal and within the rules, I was under a trial for 4 or 5 years. Was it 4 or 5 years? I think it was 4 or 5, yes. Then, when our country was indebted for the biggest loan ever given, and also it was an illegal loan in the way that it was issued by the IMF, and the judge found something that was illegal. It's strange. It's strange then, isn't it? Because we have to also perhaps look at a subject that's a bit more Latin American heavy, perhaps a little bit more Latin American. Using the judicial branch against the national governments. Fortunately, you are lucky, and these things, or if these things do happen, either they don't happen, or if they do happen, no one notices in parliamentary systems. But there is a huge problem here in our region, in this area, and I think that I can share this feeling with my fellow Latin Americans. They know precisely what I'm talking about, and also with my fellow Europeans. We all have something that comes from Europe. My name is Fernandez. So just to say, one and all, thank you so much, and indeed, let us continue to debate these issues. But in addition to the debate, let's perhaps, as a leader, let's have a conducive effectiveness. Thank you to one and all.
De este modo concluye la ceremonia de apertura de la 14ª sesión ordinaria.
This closes the opening session of the 14th session of the Euro Parliamentary Assembly, which is being held in the Kirchner Cultural Center in Buenos Aires, Argentine Republic. Thank you all very much for being present here today, and I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon.
Formalmente, audio, por favor. No, sí, me acuerdo. Lo que tenía que decir al final, hola. No lo dije todavía, ahora lo voy a decir. Declaro formalmente.
I formally declare the 14th session, the plenary session of Eurolat open. Thank you all very much.
Muchas gracias a todas y a todos por...
Thank you all very much for being present here with us. Thank you for your participation.